Marie Salomea Skłodowska-Curie's story begins in Warsaw, Poland, in 1867, long before the world knew her name, long before anyone imagined that a young girl born under the shadow of poverty and political oppression would one day change the entire course of science. She was the youngest of 5 children, raised in a family that believed deeply in education, even when the world around them tried to deny it. Russian authorities controlled Poland at the time, and Polish culture, language, and identity were heavily suppressed. Marie's parents, Bronislawa and Władysław, were teachers who secretly kept the flame of learning alive at home. Her father taught physics and mathematics and often brought home scientific instruments the school no longer allowed him to keep because Polish teachers were being pushed out. Those objects, simple things like measuring tools, magnets, and lab equipment, became treasures to young Marie. She explored them with a curiosity that seemed endless, a curiosity that quietly planted the first seeds of the scientist she would one day become. Even as a child, she showed signs of a sharp, restless mind. She read everything she could find, excelled in school, and absorbed knowledge with an intensity that even her strict teachers impressed. But life wasn't gentle with her. When she was around 10, her older sister Zofia died of typhus, a tragedy that shook the family to its core. Only 3 years later, her mother died of tuberculosis. Marie learned early what loss feels like, what grief does to the human heart, and she learned that the only thing she truly owned, something no one could take from her, was her mind. That sense of determination would follow her for the rest of her life. As she grew older, Marie wanted nothing more than to continue her education. She dreamed of becoming a scientist, but in Russian-controlled Poland, women were not allowed to attend university. The doors to higher learning were locked for her, officially. Unofficially, however, there was something called the Flying University, a secret underground school for women. Lectures were held in private apartments, constantly shifting locations to avoid the police. It was dangerous, but Marie attended anyway because she believed knowledge was worth any risk. Those years strengthened her resolve. They convinced her she wanted a life in science and nothing would stop her. To support herself and help fund her future, she worked as a governess for wealthy families, tutoring children while secretly studying whenever she could. The work was exhausting and lonely. She was far from home, responsible for other people's children while her own dreams waited quietly in the background. But she never let go of her purpose. She saved every bit of money she earned and made a pact with her older sister Bronya. Marie would help pay for Bronya to study medicine in Paris, and once Bronya became established, she would help Marie come to Paris to study too. It was a plan rooted in sacrifice, trust, and a shared hunger for knowledge. Years passed before the plan worked. Finally, at age 24, Marie arrived in Paris. She enrolled at the University of Paris, commonly known as the Sorbonne, and stepped into a world she had only imagined in secret. Paris was loud, bright, overwhelming, and freezing cold, especially in the attic room where she lived. She barely had enough money for food and sometimes fainted from hunger, but her hunger for learning was stronger. She threw herself into her studies, often working late into the night with her only companions being textbooks, borrowed lab instruments, and the cold air that crept under her door. Despite hardship, despite poverty, she excelled. She earned degrees in physics and mathematics, finishing at the top of her class in a field dominated entirely by men. It was during this time that a friend introduced her to a quiet, serious French scientist named Marie Curie. Pierre was brilliant, gentle, and deeply passionate about research. Their first meeting wasn't dramatic or romantic. It was simply 2 minds recognizing each other. Pierre admired Marie's intelligence. Marie admired Pierre's devotion to science. Slowly, naturally, they grew closer, and in 1895, they married. Their partnership became one of the most remarkable scientific collaborations in history. They worked side by side, often in poor conditions, in labs so small and poorly equipped that today they would barely be considered functional. But together, they made discoveries that reshaped the scientific world. Their lives changed forever when Marie decided to investigate mysterious rays discovered by Henri Becquerel, rays that seemed to come from uranium. Marie wondered if these rays were not just a property of uranium itself, but something deeper, something coming from the atom. She began testing every mineral she could find, measuring its radiation. Pierre soon joined her, just as fascinated. Together, they discovered two new elements: polonium, named for Marie's beloved homeland Poland, and radium, a substance that glowed with an eerie, beautiful light unlike anything anyone had seen before. Extracting radium was grueling work. Marie stirred boiling cauldrons of pitchblende for hours, sometimes days, in an unheated shed that served as their laboratory. The fumes were suffocating, the conditions harsh, and neither Pierre nor Marie knew the dangers of radiation exposure. They handled glowing test tubes with their bare hands, inhaled radioactive dust, and carried samples in their pockets. Their fatigue was constant, their health often fragile, but their determination never wavered. They knew they were on the edge of something extraordinary. In 1903, Marie, Pierre, and Henri Becquerel were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for their research on radiation. Marie became the first woman in history to win a Nobel Prize. It was a groundbreaking moment, but also a bittersweet one. Some committee members had initially intended to exclude her completely, crediting only Pierre and Becquerel. Pierre fought against this, insisting that Marie's work was essential and equal. Thanks to him, her name was rightfully included. Marie accepted the honor with quiet dignity, fully aware that she had crossed a boundary no woman before her had been allowed to cross. But tragedy struck again in 1906. Pierre, while crossing a busy Paris street on a rainy afternoon, was struck by a horse-drawn carriage and killed instantly. Marie's world broke open. She lost not just a husband, but a partner, a friend, a scientific companion. Grief threatened to swallow her, but she refused to stop. She continued the research they had begun together and even took over Pierre's teaching position, becoming the first female professor at the University of Paris. Over time, her strength returned, not because the pain faded, but because she learned to carry it. Her work with radium continued to grow. She isolated pure radium in 1910, a monumental achievement that required thousands of hours of work and enormous physical endurance. In 1911, she achieved something no human had ever achieved before. She received her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for the discovery and isolation of radium and polonium, and for her contributions to understanding radioactivity, a word she herself had coined. Her reputation grew worldwide, but she remained humble, quiet, focused on work. She refused to patent the radium isolation process because she believed scientific knowledge belonged not to individuals but to all of humanity. During World War I, she used her expertise to save lives, realizing that soldiers were dying simply because doctors couldn't see bullets and shrapnel inside their bodies. She organized mobile X-ray units, little Curies as they came to be known. Marie herself drove these vehicles to the front lines, operating equipment, training nurses, and risking her life so others might live. She taught her teenage daughter Irene how to help, and together they treated countless wounded soldiers. After the war, Marie devoted herself to building scientific institutions, including the Radium Institute in Paris, which later became one of the world's leading centers for medical and nuclear research. But the irony of her life is that the very discoveries that made her famous, the very glowing substances she handled with wonder and pride, slowly poisoned her. At the time, the world didn't yet understand the dangers of radiation. Marie carried radium samples in her pockets, slept with them in drawers beside her bed, and wrote notes in notebooks that still remain radioactive over a century later. Decades of exposure took a toll on her health. She grew weaker over time, and on July 4, 1934, she died of aplastic anemia, a condition almost certainly caused by radiation exposure. Marie Curie left behind a legacy unlike any other. She opened the doors of science for women around the world. She changed the study of physics and chemistry forever. She discovered elements, coined the term radioactivity, revolutionized medicine through X-ray technology, and became one of the most influential scientists in human history. Her life proved that brilliance can come from the humblest beginnings, that passion can survive hardship, and that dedication to knowledge can reshape the world. Marie Curie's story is not simply the story of a great scientist. It is the story of a woman who refused to accept the limits society placed on her. A woman who persevered through poverty, loss, discrimination, and the dangers of her own discoveries. A woman who showed the world that courage and curiosity can move humanity forward. Even today, her legacy glows. Quietly, powerfully, endlessly. Just like the radium she once held in her hands. If you found this helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let's continue strengthening our minds, one Stoic principle at a time. See you in the next video.